I think we're at the hour. So in the interest of time, thanks again for choosing this hour, this lunch hour after spring break to spend with us. I think you will enjoy this more than you think you will. And I'm just delighted to welcome you to one of HRC's signature events, which is our Meet VCU Authors. My name is Cristina Stancho. I'm an associate professor of English here at VCU, and I currently direct the Humanities Research Center. As many of you know, Meet VCU Authors invites members of the Richmond community, as well as colleagues and students from VCU and other local universities to meet our authors as they talk about their publications and answer questions about their work. It is also a time of celebration as, particularly in the humanities, single-authored monographs and edited collections take years to complete and bring to the readers. For their help behind the scenes, I'd like to thank particularly Ronnie Sisavath, our amazing administrative and communications assistant at the HRC, who makes all of this happen, and everyone in CHS who has supported our events for years now. Thank you also to our alumni who often attend our events and sometimes donate of their time and resources to the center. If you're regulars, you know that our events follow a more or less similar format. I'll briefly introduce our guests in this case, who will speak for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions with the audience. And please use the Q&A function. We'll monitor the chat function as well, but if you could use the Q&A function, we'll be very grateful. Today's event features Professor Bernardo Piciché. I'm sorry, I will mispronounce your name at some point, Bernardo Piciché, who is associate professor here in the School of World Studies. And the event features his work on Dante Alighieri's long poem, The Divine Comedy, one of the foundational texts of European literature for over 700 years. As the book's publisher, Rutgers University Press, notes, the unexpected Dante brings together 5 leading scholars who offer fresh perspectives on the meanings and reception of the Divine Comedy. Some investigate Dante's intentions by exploring the poem's esoteric allusions to topics ranging from musical instruments to Roman law. And I think this is where Bernardo's intervention is, as we'll learn today. Others examine the poem's long afterlife and reception in the United States, with chapters showcasing new discoveries about Nicolaus de Laurentiis' 1481 edition of Commedia and the creative contemporary adaptations that have relocated Dante's visions of heaven and hell to urban American settings. For those of you who do not know Professor Bernardo Piciché, he is an associate professor of international studies here in the School of World Studies at VCU, where he teaches predominantly world cinema. His interests are in Italian and comparative literature, film studies and Roman law applied to medieval literature, Mediterranean studies, international migration and climate change, and others. He previously taught at Hunter College in New York, Cabot University in Rome, and the University of Messina in Italy. Bernardo earned graduate degrees in both Italian literature and Italian law from the University of Rome, graduate degrees in Italian literature from the University of Paris 8, Saint-Denis, and master's degrees and the Ph.D. from Yale University. His latest publications are on Dante and Boccaccio. He published on Renaissance writers, on the relation between the painter Caravaggio and the Macaronic literature, Italian Futurism, Italian and Turkish filmmakers, on the relationship between law and literature, Mediterranean studies, and what he defines as Mediterranean philology. And please ask him what he means by that in the Q&A today. He serves on many national and international committees, including the Executive Committee of Comparative Literatures and Cultures with the MLA. He's the board member of the Center for Mediterranean Studies, Santa Anna Institute in Sorrento, Italy, and has also served as visiting faculty in the National Initiative Yale Teachers Institute. Bernardo, welcome to Meet VCU Authors.
Hello there to everybody. Thank you, Christina, for this very humbling presentation. I don't know even where you found all these things. There is a big sibling here. And thank you, Rani, also for organizing, for helping in the organization of this event. Thank you for those who are going to have the patience to listen to me. And I start immediately with the genesis of this book. There are two phases in this genesis. One was a personal one. The personal one is that once at a conference in London, I had a scholar whom I admired very much, but she's no longer with us now, saying that Cato, the character I'm going to talk about in this occasion, was a mystery for her. And that Cato would always remain a mystery. And in fact, Cato, the character that I'm going to analyze in Dante's work, is so much so a mystery that Hollander, who is a great scholar, now I don't say many names because for those who are not expert in the field, these are, but let's say a big shot that teaches at Princeton just published a few years ago a book saying it's useless to speak of Cato because it will remain a mystery for centuries. He devoted an entire book on, in a way, he made me a favor and also a mishap, because he made me the favor to publish hundreds of pages of the entire tradition of scholars that for centuries have commented about the mystery of the presence of Cato in the comedy. Now I'll tell why there is a mystery there. On the other hand, he made me he cut practically what was supposed to be a book, because half of the book that I had already written was what Hollander published before me. So I had to cut all that part. Cato is a mystery. Just one word about the comedy. I don't know who is listening to me. I don't know if there are scholars or colleagues or students, but just imagining that there are some students, we're facing a medieval book. Now, don't run away. I remember when I was in Rome, the age of our students, and I was in the studying law in Italy. Law is different from I mean, there are different schools. Law, then you study only law, then literature, you study only literature. I was in the class the first year. The professor said, we were studying Roman law. The first year is compulsory to study only Roman law, Roman philosophy. He said, you are studying exactly the civil law that your peers were studying in Constantinople 1,500 years ago. And at that point, I said, oh my God, what am I doing here? Now I'm very happy that I studied that. So don't be scared if I'm speaking of a medieval text. You will see that this medieval text is very close to our heart. And just because we are in the center of the humanity research, and the center of this center waged a sacrosanct crusade, intellectual crusade about diversity in African American situation in our world, in the world that we live in. I would like to remind you that Dante was widely read and admired by the educated African American community in the time of slavery, because his entire work, The Divine Comedy, is a metaphorical rendition of the concept of liberty. Okay? Liberty, which can be seen in many layers. There is a colleague from the University in Pennsylvania that wrote an entire book on the reception of Dante in the African American community at the time of slavery. I cannot speak of that because I have to speak of my article, my essay, but just to show you that don't be fooled by the fact that we are speaking of an author of the medieval time. The classics are such because they stay with us in the present and they allow us to understand what to do for the future. We will mention that later. Now, with Cato. As you know, the Divine Comedy is divided in three parts. Let's call it like that. The Inferno, or hell, which is the one that's most notorious. Usually in American colleges, they stop with Inferno. But there are two parts, the Purgatory and Paradise, which are much more complex. The more we go high to reach God in the Divine Comedy, the more the reading becomes complex. The major difference between Inferno and Purgatory and Paradise is that Inferno's souls are doomed. They will be doomed forever. They are the damned. On doomsday, they will stay in damnation forever. Purgatory, on the contrary, is composed by the souls that are free from the slavery of sin. They have been freed. They were sinners. They had the captivity. They were in captivity, but they, for theological conundrums that I'm not going to explain now, they suddenly were freed. Fundamentally, it's their repentance, even the last minute, sincere repentance. And so they belonged to the population of the free from the sin, so those who can have access to the presence of God. Okay, the souls in purgatory purify themselves. For them, the purification is not a punishment, it's a joy. I like to compare it to those people who submit themselves to plastic surgery that is very painful, but they're very happy. That for people in purgatory, they're very happy to suffer those pains, because they know that there is just a cleansing of their soul, and then they will go to enjoy heaven. So that's a big difference. Those are the doomed and those who are the salvaged. And again, Dante was in the mind of an Holocaust survivor, also Levi, during his Holocaust, his Auschwitz stay. Dante was continuously in his mind. And when I'm mentioning the doomed and the salvaged, I'm also quoting a title of a text by Levi, just to indicate how a classic stays with us if we absorb it, if we understand the classic. It helps us survive. Levi used to say that Dante's thought, the thinking of Dante, helped him survive in the atrocity of Auschwitz. Who is at the door of the realm of the savaged, so purgatory? Who is the one who is the controller, let's say the custom officer? Cato. Cato was a Roman character who died in the first centuries before current era as a suicide. Cato was praised at his time for his probity, honesty, and his capacity as a legislator. Mind, history is always written by the winners. I mean, he was praised by the members of his social class, which was a patrician class of Rome. Anyway, the tradition of Cato was that he was a perfect legislator. Remember that he was a legislator, and he was a legislator for the liberty of the Romans. In fact, he committed suicide in order not to become a prisoner and therefore a slave of those who will impose in the future the idea of the empire, the monarchy, the empire in Rome. So Cato, for centuries, at the time of Dante, was synonym of the man who was a perfect legislator, an honest man, a role model, and a role model for those who loved liberty, a sort of a Patrick Henry of the time, give me liberty or give me death. And as Patrick Henry, he represented the interest of his own social class, but we are not entering into the sociological analysis of Cato. Why Cato is a mystery, however. Why for centuries people have said, but was Dante drunk when he put Cato as a guardian of the purgatory among the saved? Because he's actually saved. Cato says at a certain moment, I ran away from the world, which meant the world of the sinners. So how it's possible that in a work that is a representation of the Christian Catholic theology, and is so good a representation that Dante, in spite of the fact that he puts the popes and cardinals in hell, insults them as simoniac, thieves, corrupt, etc., the Catholic Church could never ban the Divine Comedy, because the Divine Comedy has never censored. Other books have, Boccaccio's. The Divine Comedy never, because theologically the Divine Comedy is perfect. It's a representation in poetry of the philosophy of Thomas and Augustine, especially Thomas. Okay, so if you want to learn what is a Catholic creed, you have to read the Divine Comedy. Dante does what Lucretius did in the Roman time, using poetry to explain philosophy. The only difference that Lucretius was explaining a bitter philosophy, the philosophy of atheism. Dante, on the contrary, wants to present the joyful philosophy of having hope in the redemption, thanks to the misericordia of God. In fact, he calls his work commedia, comedy, not divine comedy, following an old Aristotelian distinction between tragedy and comedy. Tragedy is a play where everything starts well, a wedding, a love, and then everyone dies. Comedy is a play that starts with peripeteia, so with difficult passages, events, obstacles, and then it seems everything is collapsing, and then it ends well. Comedy ends well because it starts terribly in hell. The soul of Dante is lost, but then it ends in the sunshine of God. So that's why it's called comedy. Divine is an apposition added later by Boccaccio with double meaning. Divine comedy because it speaks of divine matters, and divine also because he wanted to say this looks like a divine inspiration. And in fact, there was an American scholar, Singleton, who thought that Dante was inspired by God in writing that. They've even spoken of that, Dante as a prophet, for the depth of his work. It's also interesting to see how in literature and in the humanities, there is an ongoing dialogue among authors. So centuries later, in the 19th century, a French author will call his series of books La Comédie Humaine, the human comedy, clear reference to the Divine Comedy. Anyway, Cato, why this mystery? Why Dante should have not put Cato there? Why he breaks his own rules so much? First rule that he breaks, he puts a pagan among the savaged. A pagan cannot be among the saved. In fact, Dante created a special, I call a VIP lounge in a situation that is not hell, but it's not even heaven or purgatory. Is in a sort of anti-hell. It's a special valley of the Ethan, a special lounge for all those great minds of the classical world that was pagan, but Dante admired. Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, the great minds that made actually the world we are now, in good and bad. We cannot ignore that we are the result of Judeo-Christian creed in dialogue, in perpetual dialogue with the Greco-Roman tradition. That's what we are. Like it or not, but that is. So Dante could not put these people in hell. Say, come on, they didn't know the God, Christ, the revelation, but why they must be punished to go to hell. So he created this little valley. In a way, he twisted a little bit the Christian theology, but that shows also the greatness of the theologians of the time that allowed that. They said, yeah, you are right. These people, the Christian of the time loved, the theologian of the time lied for a pagan author like Virgil so much that even they invented that probably, yeah, they had the revelation before Christ, and so just they wanted to save him. Okay, and here I have to put a little footnote of the greatness of the classics for our present day and not for the future, not as just an ivory tower. Dante does the same thing. He puts this valley, creates this valley also for some Muslim great philosophers and condottieri. Mind that I had a colleague who told me not to teach Dante because Dante put Mohammed in hell. But what do you expect? If it's a Christian book, of course, Mohammed is the enemy. But the greatness, and that's the greatness of great authors, is to recognize the greatness of the enemy, the greatness of Avicenna, Averroes, two philosophers, and also the condottieri, a soldier who conquered Jerusalem, but spared the life of the Christians and Jews there. And so he put also them in this special valley, breaking really with the theological tradition, because if the heathen had no fault, they had not known Christ, no one can impute them for rejecting the word of Christ. The Muslim knew Christ, they came after, but they refused it. So there is no excuse to save them, but Dante wanted to save them. And that's why I say it's a good lesson, because it's a good also political lesson nowadays of the respect of the enemy. Okay, and sorry, but I cannot forget that we live in an hour. When there was I can say also Hillary Clinton laughing at the death of Gaddafi, saying, we went, we saw, and he died, and she cackled, I was shivering, because she was quoting a classic. Yes, she was showing her classical culture. She was quoting Julius Caesar, Veni, Vidi, Vici. No, we saw, I went, I saw, and I won. And she said, we went, we saw, so we went to Libya, we saw what's happening, and Gaddafi died. But if you think of the way Gaddafi died, he was impaled at all. So it was a cackling shows that Hillary Clinton, of their classic lesson, she didn't understand anything. Because if something the classic teach is a respect of the humanity in all. And again, in another great text of the classics that Hollywood has completely changed, but the Homeric epic, we have a Priam who goes to beg for the king who lost his son, Hector. And I know that the students know about that because there are a lot of Hollywood. And he begs for the body of his son. Achilles cries, but not like in a Hollywood movie because he repents. Achilles is the perpetrator of the killing of Hector, was the one who killed Hector in a duel, but not because he repented. No, he would have killed Hector 100 times and Hector would have done the same. But he cries because Priam reminds him something that we should remind nowadays in our political discourses. Priam says, think of your father. And think of your father crying because his son is dead. Achilles cried thinking of his own father, not of tears of Priam, but he recognized the humanity in Priam. Mind that in a country that has always had a tradition that my enemy is Satan, okay, and whenever it was convenient, but in the case of the African American, they were also deprived of their soul, okay, whenever it was convenient, they were deprived of humanity. These are lessons that we get from the classics. Anyway, let's go back to the first thing. Dante put Cato as a pagan, however, as a guardian of the salvaged. And we say, okay, this is a little twist in the rule, is allowed, the church allows it. As he saved in this strange valley, the other pagans, he puts this pagan here. Because he was a man who was honest, was a symbol of the liberty that is the main concept in the world of the savage, liberty. And in fact, how does he present in the Canto 1 of Purgatory? By the way, I'm going to teach Dante next semester, so if someone is interested among the students can follow me. Virgil, who is the guide of Dante, presents Dante to Cato. Cato initially says, what's going on? This is a living body who is traveling in the other world. What is happening? He comes out of hell and he wants to go to purgatory. And Virgil presents Dante by saying, libertà va cercando che si cara come sa chi per lei vita rifiuta. I translate, liberty is seeking, that is dear to one that is able to renounce to his own life for it. And is a reference to Cato, who committed suicide. In fact, for centuries, and righteously, the acceptance of Cato was that it was an hyperbolic metaphor, an hyperbole, of the love for freedom. Cato killed himself because he didn't want to be a slave, and he is the guardian of the world of those who loved liberty. And that was right, but there was a problem in this interpretation. Why Dante put this guy? Okay, and I just tell you immediately what is the culprit. I was fortunate. I was fortunate because as I had this parallel career, I started studying literature from scratch only when I was 25, but until 25, I have a legal background, I mean, law, and I work at in the United Nations. We had to study law, Roman law for 1 year. So simply, I remember something that in the Roman law, the enfranchisement of the slave gave citizenship. But I will go automatically. And it's also important because the enfranchisement of the slave in America didn't give citizenship. Okay, but we go into that later. So first thing, Cato is a pagan and it's there. Okay, Dante has already put other pagans in a special place. So he wants to break the law. Fine. Second thing, Cato was an enemy of the idea of the empire, was an enemy of those who will found the empire, which for Dante was actually the way of ruling. He had this idea of empire. Actually, the idea of Dante, which is not his, is a medieval legal idea, is very, very modern. It's what the European Union is doing now, a Europe of identities, in which each identity can survive well, but there is a superarching power. Okay, the only difference is that the identities of the medieval time were unified with the force of the sword by a ruler, an emperor. The identities of the modern time are unified by the voters. But the concept Europe de patrie in French is the same. Anyway, but it's not Dante. Dante is an excellent encyclopedia of the knowledge of his time. So he repeats ideas that were of the jurists of the time. But he puts this enemy of Caesar. In other words, Dante is able to accept that an enemy, because he was an enemy for Dante, has positive elements, so much so that he could forgive him that he was for the Republic and not for a monarchic asset, and set him there, showing again another sign of magnanimity. Let's say that another little reflection of how history is written by the winners. Here in Virginia, the flag shows the regicide, someone who kills the tyrant, no? Semper sic tyrannis. I come from actually another tradition, the European continental tradition, so that guy who killed the tyrant as the villain, and the tyrant would have been Julius Caesar as the victim. In fact, the words that were always repeated when I was a child, even my mother, when I did something wrong and I was supposed to be a good child, tu quoque brute fili me, in Latin means you also, Brutus, my son. These were the words of Caesar, allegedly, when his own son was an adopted son, killed him in the conspiracy. For the world I come from, Dante came from, Brutus and Cassius were the epitome of the traitors. In fact, Dante put Brutus and Cassius at the bottom of hell with Judah, the three worst traitors, okay? And here in Virginia, on the contrary, it's the opposite. It becomes a hero. That also to show a certain bit of ideological relativism, okay? Remember that the story in any situation is always by the part of the, who is now in winning, okay, power. So, okay, he's a pagan. It's there. Dante closed one eye on his fact he's a pagan. He was a Republican in a sense. He wanted the Roman Republic of the patricians and not a strong dictatorship by an emperor. And we can close one eye. But the worst of all, that is a mystery, is that it was a suicide. A suicide is unacceptable in a Catholic theology, and not only in that, also in the Jewish tradition, to the point that there is a special place in hell for suicides who are actually transformed in trees because they refuse their body, so they can't even deserve to have a body. They're in trees, and when they die, and when there will be the doomsday, whereas everyone assumes their own body according to the Catholic theology, they will not. They will just keep their skin on because they refuse the body. They are not even worth to have the bodies in the eternal damnation. Okay, suicide. There have been theological debates about a possible permission of committing suicide. For instance, one typical case was commented by some authors, St. Thomas, when a woman was at risk of losing her honorability, virginity, The Roman tradition honored these women who, for instance, one famous Cornelia, who killed themselves out of shame after being assaulted or to avoid to be assaulted. They were considered heroine. And again, a lot of little footnotes, how the humanities allow how to have a political discourse, a social discourse, and a discourse that interests us in any way. Darwin, you all know Darwin, 19th century, when he traveled along the world with his with a ship called the Beagle, ended in Brazil and found himself in a moment in which was a slave revolt. And he described that and described how the slaves were all killed, and except one elderly woman who committed suicide out of a cliff, not to finish as a slave again. And Darwin commented, and I want to show that how someone can speak also politically, not in a confrontational way, but just letting people reflect on that. That was literature oftentimes does, the cinema oftentimes does. People shows to those who wants to reflect. Of course, if those people are text messaging, they miss the details. He says, this woman in Rome would have been considered a heroine because she died to save her liberty. On the contrary, in the description of the contemporaries, where of course the white Brazilian ownership, she was so wretched, so stubborn, that she preferred to die rather than being back to the embrace of her master. See, Darwin was not a revolutionary, but he inserted this comment. I mean, in a book, there was a travelogue, there was a book of travels and sciences, but yet it's a comment that was a good grain of thinking for those who want to think. Okay, let's go back. A suicide, however, I cut short a few centuries of debate on the suicide. Finally, the suicide is not acceptable. And Cato is a suicide. Why Dante put Cato there? So this is a mystery. Pagan, okay. Republican, okay. But a suicide person, it's impossible that he can be saved, according to the theology. Now it's where I come. By chance, I happened to remember once that I was looking at something on the French Revolution of the pileus, which is the beret, the headgear that the Marianne, the symbol of the French Revolution, wear. This is a hat that the enfranchised slave in Rome put on their head. And that's why the French Revolution has that, because they were freed from the slavery of the tyrant, of the Louis XVI, of the Bourbon, of the absolute monarchy. And suddenly a flash came and said, wait a minute, but it's true, they become citizens, but it's a Roman quotation, because in Rome, according to the law of Rome, a slave was emancipated. Emancipated, in fact, means that the hand, manus in Latin, is put on the shoulder and removed to say you're free, or enfranchised, became immediately citizen, like all the other Romans. Okay, was so much so that the Emperor Augustus tried to limit that. So there were some centuries in which that was not the case in total. But then the final word was by Emperor Justinian in the 6th century with the Corpus Juris, which is a really body of law that we call Roman law. That is the ancestor of the civil law of the Western canon. Alongside, in the medieval time, a three system of law: the Corpus Juris, which is the civil law by the Justinian emperor who cleansed all the 1,000 years of Roman tradition; the canon law, which is a law that were developed in the papacy environment, in the papacy, they were the popes, so to speak, laws; and the common law, which were the customs, the little habits that the people took during the century. So these were the three pillars of the medieval law: civil law, which was Roman, Corpus Juris; canon law, which was based on Catholic ontology; and the common law. So the civil law says every slave becomes citizen, and that's where Cato stands. Cato was a jurist. he understood very well the meaning of the word liberty. Only a Roman jurist could understand that Dante was seeking the citizenship in the city of the saved, of the free. We have to move a step back. The entire Dantean idea is that Rome was a parallel to heaven on the earth. He calls heaven the celestial Rome and says Christ was a Roman. So for him, the two realms were parallel. The Rome on the earth, heaven on the sky. Being parallel, they had also a legal system that had to be parallel. And if the legal system of Rome makes a slave to be enfranchised, I have another 4 minutes again, make a slave be enfranchised, also the system of heaven make a citizen, so a slave that is enfranchised, a citizen. Also the system of heaven made someone who was a slave of the devil, slave of the sin, freed from this slavery, enfranchised from the slavery of the sin, a citizen of heaven. So Dante is asking, Virgil is asking for Dante to allow Cato to pass as a full citizen into the world of the celestial Rome, because he's no longer a slave of the sin. By the way, for instance, in Italian, cattivo, the word cattivo, which derived from captivus, also we have in English captivity, in fact, was derived from captivus diaboli, prisoner of the devil. So a cattivo, which is a bad person, is the prisoner of the devil. So cattivo, that means. So Dante is no longer a captivus, is no longer a prisoner of the devil. And so he asks the right to become a full citizen of the city of the savaged. And only a Roman could understand that. Now you can tell me, Bernardo, you are joking with your, like those pastors in your TV that speaks of God as if they were in the mind of God. Let's speak on what something is called philology, so find the proof. In entire comedy, and that's not me who noticed that, but there are great scholars like Auerbach, Dante uses the words that the characters that he interviews or interact with use. For instance, when he speaks to Francesca, who was a grande dame, the language is the courtly language of southern France. Okay, in the case of Cato, he can speak a juridical language because Cato is a jurist. And we have 2 minutes. Now, the solution of the mystery is Dante is telling Cato, listen, you know very well, you understand very well that I am no longer a slave, and therefore I have the right to become a citizen in the Rome that is in heaven. Question that you can tell me again, but Dante, what did he know about law? Why you think Dante thought all these things? All right. Dante, was he a jurist? No. Did he study law? No. So how come that you think that he thought of these things? Well, first of all, if you see me with a computer at Starbucks in the library, don't think that I'm a high-tech engineer. It's the fact that literacy in our present era wants computer, and literacy in the medieval time wanted a sound knowledge of legal principles first. Why? Because the law was following the same methodology, mental methodology, intellectual approaches of philosophy and theology. An educated man in the medieval time had to be strong in theology, philosophy, and law. They use the same method, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. They all come from the Greek philosophy in a way. Argument and counter-argument, the same. So every educated person in the medieval time had a strong knowledge of the legal mind, at least. First. Second, Dante had been an administrator, a politician, so he had to use the laws. Third, his educational background, where he visited Bologna, the capital of law. He probably never went to Paris, even if his children say that he went. But in Florence, he frequented an oratorium, which is a church, with monks who were jurists and came from Bologna. So clearly the discussions were dealing on these topics. So it's an idle question to wonder if Dante had studied law on a regular curriculum like other great Italian authors of the time, Petrarch and Boccaccio. He didn't, but he knew this topic. Another question, and someone can tell me, but how Dante knew these laws of Rome, since he quotes in a comedy certain laws, that one, for instance, that women who drank could be repudiated by their husband, something like that. If you want to ask about that, I can tell you, because that was an older law, and I have just passed 1 minute. In 1 minute, I finish. That was an older law. Well, the knowledge of law in the medieval time passes also through other sources. For instance, the rule that the women, one of the 3 causes of divorce for women was adultery, trying to kill the husband and the children, and drinking. Si vinum bibet is a Roman formula, if she drinks wine. There is an explanation for that, but it was an old law, abolished hundreds of years before the Corpus Juris, which is the only body of law that Dante legitimately could have known, because it was the one that was discussed and studied at the time of Dante. But these old rules had been eliminated, so you could not find them in the body of law, had remained as quotations into literary works. So in poetical works of Roman or theater or plays or theater plays, Dante could have access to those remnants of a law that had become culture at the time. Okay, so the knowledge of certain particular legal matters is just due to the fact that those were eliminated from the body of law, the legal actual body of law, but they remained as a cultural phenomenon. All right. So I would like just to conclude, if you allow me, with a few examples how in an author like Dante, we understand why we can't skip the humanities. You can skip the study of art and literature and so on. Dante, it's something I was thinking this morning, when you've seen there are 3 banks that bankrupted. Now you remember. Well, believe it or not, Dante, following the Aristotelian system of law, which and Aristotle lived 1,600 years before Dante, the white-collar crime in that system are punished much more severely than violence. Here, if someone enters a room, etc., goes to hell, breaks in a house or steals a car or attacks someone, it goes immediately to jail, maybe to prison forever. And big white-collar CEO, bank tellers who give mortgages to people who cannot pay for the house, sometimes I mean, considered business. Okay, in the mentality of Dante, and therefore before the mentality also of both theological creed, but also Aristotelian Greco-Roman mentality, this white collar who betray the trust should be paid much more severely of the violent, or the brutes. Why? Because we are a social animal. That's all what the humanists say. We have to survive, however much we dislike the human beings, and I can tell you I'm one, but we have to live in a society, okay? We have to try to live in a civilized way. And so whatever kills the social trust is more dangerous than, for instance, a poor homeless who decided to steal a car or even kill someone in a robbery. Those who implement a system, which is exactly the American system of nowadays, so they say what you want, a system that is based on an intellectual fraud, that we can lose houses for mortgages we cannot pay, we make students pay prices so high to go to school, and then who knows what with debts, and then who knows if they find a job. We are all part of that. I'm happy they're recorded, because I'm also thinking we play with the system. These people are way below in the ethical scale of Dante, of this world of the classics. And that's one example. Another example Dante tells in one line, warning the tyrants, that they are responsible for the evil that they do, but also for the evil that the reaction against them causes. So when we see sometimes the terrorists to put bombs in the baskets, okay, or when we get surprised by the violence of revolt in Haiti, when the slaves revolted and they killed women and children, we must remember that those slaves had been freed by Napoleon, sent to France, armed, trained to fight. They fought, they won, and when the war was over, they were gathered together in Corsica and enslaved again. I mean, honestly, I've considered myself a quite mild person, but had I been one of those slaves, I would have started also killing the children of my master, because I would have said they would become like his father. So the violence in Haiti is terrible, but what is important to remember that women, French women who accepted to marry an African in Haiti, they were free. So there was not the dehumanization of the enemy. Okay, that is important, not to get scandalized by the fury, because the fury it's caused by the time. Wherever we see, in any revolution, we say horror, Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, in any revolution. But there is, Dante says there is a responsibility in those who cause also such horror as a reaction. We have why, and I stop here, why I would like that we would not consider the classic, call it Shakespeare, call it Goethe, call it Cervantes, just an ivory tower. I mean, I lost my mother of cancer when I was 15, and I remember her rolling on the bed in pain. And Dante compared the countries that have many laws that change continuously and don't find the peace to a sick woman who is rolling in bed. Okay, you see, it speaks. And actually, anytime that we receive a new order from administrator at VCU, I think of another line of Dante when he pokes fun at Florence that makes such laws so good and so that they start in October, and in November they've been already abolished, because we have a turnover administrators that every year there is a new disposition, then the administrator goes away and the program remains floating. So, and that's the entire world apparently is like that. And that's Dante helps with that. But also Dante helps to remember our first kiss. There was an Italian poet who said that Dante wrote the most beautiful line of kiss, verse on kiss ever written. Questi che mai da me non sia diviso, la bocca mi baciò tutto tremante. This that never must be parted by Mrs. Francesca Cisinel kissed my mouth while all trembling, while he was trembling. It was the first trembling kiss. And I conclude that just with a prayer. Don't think that I'm referring to the students, if there are, I don't know, is here, we're here just for an extra credit. Don't think that the humanities are an ivory tower of privilege. No. If they were that, I would have not devoted my life to study literature. It would have been too much of a futile thing. And the humanities as a way that allow us to stand on our feet when everything collapses around us. And I mentioned Levi and Dante, but I give an example from a cheap Hollywood movie by an Italian author who made this movie just to win the Hollywood, making all the cliche. Benigni, Life is Beautiful. He's a child which is in a concentration camp. His father saves the child, the life of the child, by teaching him that they are in a big game, and there is the hide and seek with the cop, and the cop are the bad guy, which are the Nazis, and he has to hide, and at the end he will win a tank. What happens, of course, sure enough, happy end, the war ends, the father dies, but the child is rescued because he could hide, he was able to hide, and he, of course, he sees a tank with the American flag. In fact, the tank were with Russian flags, to be historically correct, but Hollywood is in America, so the flag had to be American, and he gets the tank. What I say about this cheap movie, the fact that the child was saved not only physically, but mentally. He had no trauma, thanks to what? Thanks to dreaming. And what is art if not also dreaming? Not only dreaming, art is fatigue, man is working, but there is a component of imagination. So imagination, art, is not a luxury for idle people or for lazy people. It's a necessity to survive, to win the difficult moment of our troubled life. And just one last thing, and I say goodbye and I shut up, ready to listen to you all. Art is a result of sorrow, like a pearl that is a result of a violent attack. The pearl is the animal that is attacked by an external presence, tries to open the shell. They close and they build something around that wound, but it's painful. But from that pain, pearl comes out. So I just would like to call a center of humanities a center of pearls. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernardo. And, for the record, everyone, I did not ask Bernardo to say any of these wonderful things about the humanities or the benefits of the humanities education. And I really liked what you said at the end. There are so many great points in this talk, but I really liked what you said about not being in the ivory tower, or, as you put it, it's not a luxury, but a necessity to help us stand on our feet when the world around us crumbles. So, this is an important idea, and I'm very grateful to you for this and for this sweeping journey of hundreds of years to bring Dante to us. But in the spirit of discussion and debate, I would like to challenge you a little bit, and I would like to to ask you, why offer a solution, right, to this Cato problem you've identified in Dante? Because the humanities are notoriously famous for not offering solutions, but for asking even more questions. So could you take us back to that moment where the aha, right, and your training in legal history really provoked this new angle, right, on the interpretation of the Divine Comedy, and how that particular moment has, produced that shift for you?
Well, I seen a Dovigo. I was in the meantime afraid, because something I don't like is his conception of the scholar like a pioneer who has to put a flag and discover everything, new things, and all what was said before was idiotic and no one understood anything. I don't like. In fact, it took me 20 years. And I had the words of Dante that when he's asked by Virgil and he's told, you have been elected to travel in the other world, he says, I'm not Aeneas, I'm not Paul, characters that allegedly travel in the other world. Who am I? And I used to say the same thing. I'm not Hollander. I am not that. Who am I that I can find that? And then I more and more, I went lecturing, and I was afraid that I was saying something that would have attacked me. And then finally, when I had this lecture at the Library of Congress, and I had to write, I said, okay, in these years that I'm lecturing on that, no one has ever said I was wrong. Actually, everyone congratulated me. I was surprised that no one wrote about that before I did finally. And so that, but yeah, it was a component also pure ego somehow to say, okay, I also can say something about that.
Fair enough. Now I'm turning to the Q&A, where our colleague Mimi Winnick has already offered two very good questions, and I think we still have time for a couple more. So if people are still ruminating, please post them either here or in the chat. Mimi, thanks so much for these provocative questions. I'd like to start with your second one, which I think connects more to our recent discussion, which is what drew you to move from studying law to studying teaching law and literature, and what's most different between these two careers? Thank you.
What's the longer? May I have also the other question so I can calibrate my answer for the time, because we have 6 minutes.
Sure. The other question also from Mimi: as a teacher, how do you help make sure that your students and readers learn the classics, including the lesson to respect the humanity in it all, or in all, and not to misuse the classics, as in your example about the person cackling over the death of Gaddafi while quoting Julius Caesar?
All right. The first, this latter, it's what I taught today was what I say in class. That's my standard lecture. So I don't know if it's effective, but it's my way to make the classics alive, okay, and to show that Ovid speaks of rape, but also give the tones of the rape. That makes, if we read about the rape, we will read the compassion for gay, the words that he uses, and not only, but Ovid puts a 15-year-old girl to teach the warriors of Homer how to die. In the moment she dies on an altar as a sacrifice, the girl, and she's Polissena, and she teaches them and makes them cry for words of St. James. Practically, a young girl is considered a hero. And I also remind you, now that we are speaking of that, the Homer, the patriarchal Homer, but the only person who is able to dupe Ulysses, the most conniving and astute individual. I have not much sympathy for Ulysses, actually. The Romans in general didn't have for this. But the guy was so astute in everything, shrewd. The only person who is, you know what is a woman, his wife. Because when he comes to her and he wants, he says, I am your husband. But she said, who is this man? 20 years. Who knows if. So she said, okay, yeah, now I recognize you. Yes, help me move the bed. And the hero of shrewdness starts crying. What? You have moved the bed. You have changed the bed. Our bed was our secret. They had a bed that was inamable, was a stump, a trunk. So and they put just a fur over this trunk. So that's probably not very comfortable. But there was and it was a secret only between husband and wife. And Andromache and Penelope laughed because she said, well, I needed to know if you knew that secret. Only my husband could know the secret. So she was able to dupe her husband. She was able to put in a trap her husband, okay, a woman. And in Homeric, it's another woman, Andromache, who tells actors how the city of Troy had to have the wall rebuilt in one part of the city that they were weak, so like a general. So we have to see this from the classics. But those people who accuse the classics, who say the Ovid must not be taught anymore, because they've never read that. That's a fact. So that's the problem. And let me go to the answer. Yes.
How would you, this is, and then I promise I will move to the last two great questions, which are more about Catholicism and its relationship to Dante. But, you know, to your point about, you know, the classics, how would you argue, you know, not that you have to, but how would you argue to your students or to students interested in studying the classics that this is a very worthy pursuit, investing in and not necessarily flying to STEM disciplines? What would be your pitch there?
Well, honestly, I don't see that as a contradiction. Let us not forget that the Nobel Prize, Rubia, in sciences, in physics, has a degree in classics. I do think the classics are a standpoint for everyone, not out. You will be a better doctor, and not only because you maybe study Latin and Greek and you understand the name of the pharma, but you will be a better doctor if you will have this idea of compassion, this idea of disinterest. You know, so I think that the classics are, again, not a choice in alternative of, but they are part of the air that we breathe. That's why I think that humanity should be a little bit more seriously taught in the high school, in the middle school, because it's the formation of that. So I don't want to say, no, please be fair mathematics. I remember when I got the tenure, the vice dean or the dean of the time was, he told me that he was a chemical person. He said, I understood much more about human beings by using chemistry. And I responded, you may know how they digest, how they defecate, but not what they dream by using your chemical knowledge. So far we can't. Okay, it's the same point. And we are dream also. We are hopes. We are why, and I can come to the answer why I decided not to be a lawyer, which is a family tradition. I studied law because in Italy, especially the males, used to do what their parents did. And I come from a family of legal tradition. And I hated that. But now I thank it, because of the way the Italian system was conceived, we were not a professional school studying law like in America. I never saw a court. I was never able to be anything that a lawyer does. We started, the idea was a German idea, or maybe elitist as you want, but the university was free, to become an intellectual. So the first year was only Roman and philosophy, and another year was a canon. So I can tell you a lot about the or the pro and cons of that penalty, but I've never been in a court. I've never become a lawyer. But I hated that because I wanted to study literature. Since the high school, I wanted to study literature. And I thought, well, everyone dreams to study literature. But when I was 25, I already had my degree, I already had attended my diplomatic school for 1 year. Thank goodness that I didn't become a diplomat because I would have caused a war with my mouth. I worked in the United Nations in Rome for 1 year. And then I said, no, I was a soldier for 1 year compulsory service. And at the end of 25 years, almost 26, I said, I want to start from scratch. At that point, my father saw my mother died long ago. I saw my passion and allowed me to do that. And I love so much literature that when I went to Yale, they asked me to study law and literature. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I want to study only literature. I repent because that was a nice field and maybe I could have taught in a law school. Anyway, I don't know. I just want to do literature, okay? And I went to Paris before going to Yale because I was tired to respond to everyone in Rome, why you're not a lawyer with your father. Even if I went to buy bread at the grocery in the street who knew me since I was a child, I had to justify that I was studying again from zero literature. Okay, so that's the answer. It is a passion. In my life, I made many mistakes. One was to come to America, but yes, but now I'm here, I have to stay. But one thing I would never repent in my life is to have become a reader. I don't like to publish too much. I'm against this system of, assembly line even applied to the humanities. Dante, by the way, puts in heaven among the wise someone who spent all his life to write one book and wrote only the first chapter of the book. That's another mentality. And I have my father who keeps saying, teaches also university law, keeps saying, go slowly, don't write too fast. Yeah, write too fast. Okay, but one thing, it's a vocation, and that someone has, someone's not. I mean, for me, it's a vocation. It's a pleasure. So that's why I decided I could afford, but not because I came from a relatively well-to-do family, but because in Italy it was free. Okay, I could start again from the first year because that was a lie. My only thing I had to live with my father until I was 28, and then I left to go to France. But for the school was free, so that's something that would be difficult to do in America. Actually, because we speak of inclusiveness and diversity, but we forget that the first thing to be inclusive is to have free schools, free. Paid by those who pay the taxes, because I know already when I say free, people say nothing is free. Okay, yes, let's pay. Okay, I stop here.
Thank you. And we have two more questions I'd like us to get to, and I'm hoping to combine them. So John Freudheim, thank you so much for your question. This is about Dante's relationship with the Catholic Church. He'd like to know more about your understanding of why the church did not condemn Dante. Or how perhaps the church saw opportunity through Dante's work to further its own power.
John, hello, I'm glad to hear you. I was thinking of you actually a few days ago. First, Dante knows his theology and knows his doctrine. And so when he condemns popes, there are popes that can only be condemned because they are notorious corrupt. When he says that in the circle of the avaricious he finds a lot of clergy, it's because everyone knew, even the clergy at the time, that the church had problem. Let us not forget that this is also the medieval time of St. Francis. Okay, so Dante doesn't say anything wrong in the eyes of someone who is honest, intellectually honest. Okay, and others could be silenced. But Dante, no, Dante was unattackable. He's a cathedral in poetry. So the first. Second, definitely is the best porte-parole of the, he would have called Christian, now we call Catholic, Roman Catholic, because they were then the Protestant coming, but at the time was only either Orthodox or Christians of the Western canon, so the Roman. He was the best porte-parole of the Roman creed, because in the comedy, now we call Divine Comedy, there are passages, there are theological passages that are very difficult. The conundrum, when he explains the free will, when he explains the suffering of the children, when he explains, so the concept of fortune. So he tackles, or he touches and delves into all the theological matters. So definitely he was admired. He was admired by the church, and he was admired by, imagine that it's still now in Florence, 700 years later. Dante died in 1321, okay, and he wrote the comedy in the last 20 years of his life. In Florence, still now, once a week, there is a public reading of Dante, okay, like the old prophets. Something has never changed, has never stopped through the centuries, okay, Florence. So it's part also of our, is embedded in our almost DNA. But to go back to your answer, there were moments in which certain passages of Dante were not read, but he was never censored as author. As a person, he was, when he was alive and was a politician, since he was an adversary of Pope Boniface VIII, he had to run away from Rome when he was ambassador of Florence because he risked to be killed. So he had problems with the real church when he was a real person. But in his literary world, he didn't have any problem. That shows also that the church was made by intelligent people. Otherwise, an institution, well, some can believe that it's a godly. I don't believe in God. So an institution doesn't remain so strongly for 2000 years if it has not a substance. Okay.
And connected to that answer, thank you so much. Susan Donaldson question, which I think is also about the reception of the Divine Comedy, but also about its content. So why did the Catholic Church of the time allow the Divine Comedy to become so influential? I'm not sure if this is the argument you made. I think that you made the argument that it became more and more influential over time, right? Even though much of the poem is Dante's own fantasy without supporting biblical evidence, especially in the case of Cato, who Dante showed as the guardian of purgatory, despite committing the unforgivable sin of suicide. Many of the poem's details do not fall in line with the Bible.
These are all questions that will require volumes. So the same question could have added, why Dante in a Christian text quotes Venus, Jupiter, the pagan god? That's also the greatness of literature, that it is, yes, an exemplification of the Catholic theology, but not only. It's a text of literature. There is a famous director who is considered a realist, a documentarist, and he says, I would trade truth for a nice scene. But that's the beauty of literature, because of those nice scenes that betray truth, those mentions of Juno, Jupiter, Venus, which are lies, which were well understood at the time by the readers of the time, the few readers. I mean, it was more listened because someone was reciting by heart. When I was a child in Rome, there was a waiter in a restaurant that recited Dante by heart to me anytime I went to same country with that. But the beauty is that those lies allow us to understand better the truth. So all this metaphor, including the pagan gods, all the things allowed us to penetrate the greatness of the human experience. And the Divine Comedy is not only a text of theology, it's a text of law, a text of economics, a text of politics. And it's a text on the human being, because fundamentally, whatever literature, poetry, paintings, theater, cinema do is to speak to us of our condition, trying to give a proper explanation for the absurdity of living. And again, we have to go back to Aristotle whenever we ask from literature, from cinema, oh, but it should explain, it should explain. We don't have to overlap the disciplines. If I really want to know the condition of the paupers in Paris in the 19th century, I don't have to read Zola. I have to go to delve into the archive and make a sociological and historical research. But if I wanted to feel what the paupers were feeling in those times, I have to read Zola. In other words, the poet, Aristotle said, fills the gap left by the historian. The historian tells that Julius Caesar won that battle, but it's a Shakespeare that comes to dream what Julius Caesar was thinking before or after winning the battle. Was that truth? No. But it's a truth because it's our truth. It allows us to understand the humanity of us, of ours, more than the one of Caesar. That's a magnificent mystery of the humanities.
Thank you so much. This is a wonderful place to end. I'm sorry we have to end here. What an education and what a wonderful discussion. Congratulations again on the publication of the book, Bernardo. And thank you so much to those of you who stuck around for a few extra minutes. I just a couple of plugs because I have to make them. I would like you to please mark your calendar for the next event and meet VC authors on Friday, on April, I think Monday, April 4th, the first Monday in April at noon, when Professor of English Nick Frankel will talk about his recent books on Oscar Wilde. And also I'd like to bring your attention to an event happening this Friday at noon, also virtually. Join us for a Fulbright panel led by Dr. Jill Blondin and Mr. Jeff Wing on how to prepare a successful application for a Fulbright Scholar Award. Bernardo, thank you so much for being here. Audience members, thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful week ahead, and we look forward to seeing you virtually and in person at future events at the HRC. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.